Good morning and good afternoon, chat. Good to be with you again. I thought that I would get back onto the book and see how we get along today. I'm feeling a little bit better. As you can see, hopefully the voice is not it's not so bad as yesterday's vocal fry. And, well, we'll have to do a little recap on the book because anyone who hasn't seen, I recommend you go back to Bedtime book part 1, part 2, part 3 because they're all cracking. They'll have you in fits of laughter. But on the last episode, well, they went to Wales in a camper. They went camping with the tent. Everything went wrong. They were in a big storm. They took Mum, if you remember. They took the grandmother, and she was funny. I love Mum, as not Brenda, because obviously the story has been told by Emma, the young girl, and her dad Tony, and her mum Brenda. But then there's Tony's mum from Wales, not far from where I live. And so I can explain a little bit culturally as well as we go along, different things, So anyway, I'm happy that you're here, even though it's not live right now. And I'm not doing it as a premiere either. I'm just doing it and putting it out. But whoever's listening, I'm happy that you were here. Thank you for being here. And please like, subscribe. Please check your subscriptions because I'm noticing I'm subscribing to other channels and then all of a sudden I'm not subscribed, and I haven't done that. So I don't know. I think it's YouTube, but is it, totally fine if you don't want to subscribe. I completely understand. That's absolutely fine, right? But I'm just saying, just check them just to be so you get the notifications as well. And yeah, we all gotta say that, haven't we? Every time we come on, every kind of YouTuber or whatever comes on, and they all have to say those things. And it gets repetitive and boring. I'm already bored with it. I haven't been on you very long. I can imagine all these big channels that have to do this like all the time. But it's important. It's important for the channel. But for me, I just like to interact with you. So leave me a comment, and I always get back. I always reply back to comments, and yeah. So anyway, we are now on a different part of the book. So last time there was the big storm, everything went wrong. Mum was saying, oh gosh, it all went wrong because, Emma saw a dead sheep. And, oh gosh, it's a bad omen to see a dead sheep on a day travel, so that's why everything went wrong according to Mum. And, so it's that's where we left off. So here we go. This is on the verge. Please tell me you're joking, said Brenda, turning to stare at my father. Her hands were in fists that were dripping off her hips. No, I'm not joking. I think we should go back to Wales, said my dad, who was now taking things so seriously he'd grown a beard. Because we didn't get to see anything last time. And this way we can stop off, see all the family, and then go on to the Gower. Oh, Gower's a lovely place to go, mind. And Phyllis can come too, with her boyfriend. It'll be nice. Oh, Tony's trying to convince her. A determination to send some demons packing, combined with what we all suspected was a willful act of madness, had set our summer in stone. we would be returning to the scene of the crime. The grand social experiment of Newtown Utopia was in its early bloom on our council estate in Stevenage. The dream was to house young doctors next to young factory workers, to place engineers shoulder to shoulder with cleaners, and our estate, the rectangle that was the sum total of my world, was no exception. It was a jam jar of political destiny. Post-war government had concocted a vision whereby classless communities would meet on equal terms, cohabit, and enjoy common cultural and recreational amenities. It was an artificial construction with designated zones dictating work and play. There was nothing organic about Stevenage. Its concrete corners barked what to do and when. For my young, idealistic parents, this new social order was the shape of things to come. For me, I was just interested in playing in the communal rectangle in front of our house. There were 2 rules my mother forced me to adhere to. First, I was only allowed to play within the confines of the rectangle. And second, under no circumstances whatsoever was I to wander into the concrete underpass that led off to the shops, a place where evil chips and sweets lurked like malevolent goblins. Because this was a fledgling estate. All of the families who lived on it were about the same age, creating a wondrous pool of playmates. That's like a bit like where I grew up. In my street, we had a cul-de-sac, and everybody was either the same age as kids, or a year below, or a year above. And so you can imagine now, there's like the grown up with the children of their own. It's crazy. It's how big the family will get then later on. But yeah, at that time it was a bit like that where I grew up, I suppose, in my street. Anyway, back to this book. Right, where was I? Nowadays, it would be unthinkable to leave a 4-year-old to her own devices. But back in 1971, being tossed out the front door after breakfast and not coming back to lunch was perfectly normal. I would run up to my dressing-up box, pick out the day's outfit, and off I would scamper, climbing into my little red pedal car to do endless circuits of the paved circumference. I didn't have a care in the world. What I did have, however, was a constant compulsion to inform my mother of everything that was happening. She was a snitch. She was snitching on everyone. My mother, the English teacher, always had books to prepare or marking to do, and would valiantly try and get on with things. But she would be interrupted by me ringing the doorbell. How'd you reach the doorbell? She only 4. They must have had a very low doorbell. By ringing the doorbell every 10 minutes with an on-the-spot update. Susan Fletcher has hurt her knee. I would announce, hand on hips. Or we were playing 50-50, and Simon Hall said he was it, and then Paul Howard said he wanted to be it, and then they were both it, and Simon Hall pushed Paul Howard in the bushes, and now Paul Howard's gone home, and Simon Hall said he's stupid. Or, and this one's a daily occurrence, he's done a poo in the roses again. Don't you just love it when the kids come back and forth, you go, this has happened and that's happened and this has happened, and you're going, really, all right, yeah, what did it? Ooh, yeah, okay. I mean, you're actually miles away. But to them, it's important for us to listen. We have to listen. But yeah, he's done a poo in the roses again. Shitting boy was my mother's bête noire. Secretly, she wanted to tell me I wasn't allowed to play with him, but because his family had been shipped out from the dark ghettos of the London slum, his liberal sensibilities were prepared to overlook his social shortcomings in the hope that our middle-class aspirations would rub some manners into him via osmosis. In reality, he was a little bastard. And no amount of well-meaning lenience was going to change him anytime soon. But my mother, ever the nurturer of lost causes, was always ready to bite the bullet and welcoming him with semi-open arms. Semi-open arms, I like that. I like that. The day before we were to return to Wales, Shitting Boy had gone and... Why does he go and shit in the roses? I don't get it. Shitting Boy had me cornered in the rectangle. He was 3 years older than me and had a tangle of lanky brown hair. He seemed to have olive skin, but it could have been dirt. And the faint smell of chip fat used to waft off him as if he'd rolled in a greasy paper. He was skinny, with legs like twiglets, and in summer months he always wore a tatty t-shirt and football shorts. I wasn't quite sure what I thought of him. I knew he was naughty, which felt dangerous, and was aware that he regularly stood in the concrete underpass while I would stand rooted to the spot with my mouth open before running off to tell my mother. But then again, he was totally different to anyone else on our estate. He was an oh gosh, it's French, man. Take me back to school. He was an amuse-bouche. I think that's how you say it. A finger pointing in the unknown, and for that he elicited my curiosity. Like my bike, he asked, as I stared at him from my pedal car. He was sitting astride a magnificent bright orange Mark I rally chopper. I'd never seen anything like it. The majesty of the high drooping handlebars, the knife-thin saddle, and then the gear stick all combined in my mind to create one of the most impressive things I'd ever seen. I nodded. I thought it was brilliant. As if to double underline my fascination, Shitting Boy pushed down on the pedals and rode off. He was a little bit unsteady, but he tore around our rectangle with a speed I could only dream about. Screeching to a halt in front of me, Shitting Boy sat back, leaning in the backrest of the saddle, one black plimsoll on the floor. He looked cool, and he knew it. And then we heard the yelling. "Oi!" came a voice from the underpass. "Oi, you!" I looked over my shoulder to see an angry, burly-looking man striding towards us, holding his hand with a small ginger-haired boy. Holding his hand was a small ginger-haired boy who was crying and pointing. Oh, God. Oh, no. "There he is," sobbed the boy. "That's him." Shitting Boy, sensing that the game was up, kicked down on the pedals to sprint off. The chopper, a precarious ride at the best at times, wobbled away, and unable to control it, Shitting Boy was thrown to the floor as the bike veered off in a loop and clattered to a stylish rest in front of me. A large adult arm entered the frame and picked Shitting Boy up off the floor. "Is this him?" asked the man, looking down at his tear-stained boy. The lad nodded and ran to pick up his bike. "Oh, I want his bike, you little bugger," which he swiftly sat on as if to reclaim his property. The man turned back to Shitting Boy. "Try and steal my boy's bike again," he said, pressing a finger into Shitting Boy's chest, "and I'll rip your arms out, understand?" Oh, God! And then, because it was still only in 1971 and no one gave a damn, he gave Shitting Boy a proper old-fashioned wallop. Bug-eyed at the entire incident, I got out of my pedal car. "Where are you going?" asked the man, throwing me a look. to tell my mum, I said, pointing in the direction of my front door, because this was easily the most exciting thing to have happened since Becky Martin's skipping rope broke. Well, take him with you, said the man, shoving the shitting boy in my direction, and tell your mum he's a very bad boy, which probably thinks the same kid. Oh, as I ran towards my house, my brain whirred with the urgency of it all. By the time I had my finger on the doorbell, I was actually jumping up and down. There was a bike and a man and a boy. I rattled as the door opened, still jumping, and then he fell off it, and the man came, and the bike was on the floor, and the boy took it, and the man smacked him. All right, said shitting boy, who saddled behind me. Oh, hello, said my mother, folding her arms and throwing him a glance. And the bike was orange, and had bended arms, and he rode it around. I clattered on, pointing over in the direction of where it all happened. That's nice, said my mother, not paying an awful lot of attention. Are you going upstairs to play? Come in then. Do you want a drink? I've got lemonade. Do you want lemonade? Yeah, all right, said shitting boy, pushing me in the door. Where's your room then? Upstairs. And they came out to the pass to get it, and yes, it's upstairs. And we went up the stairs. I felt like Bonnie and Clyde. My bedroom was an oasis of mess. The arrangement that I had come to with my parents was that as long as I respected every other room in the house, I could do whatever I wanted in mine. I was allowed to draw on the walls. What? Draw on the walls? I'd be bloody damned if I'll be drawing on walls. Yes, only once did my daughter draw on the walls. She never did again. But if a good tip, if it's felt tip marker, put a bit of hairspray on it. Brilliant solution, and it really does work, especially if it's permanent marker. Hairspray, right? Bit of a tip for you there, but chat. So, I was allowed to draw on the walls. I was allowed to paint the floor. How was she getting into all this stuff? I was allowed to leave every book, doll and lump of Lego I possessed strewn across the bright yellow carpet in the sea of activity. Now, chat, I loved Lego, right? My daughter had Lego. But the one thing I cannot stand is Lego left out. And then you go stand on it with your foot. Oh, it's like standing on a plug. It kills. Oh, it really hurts. Anyway, just as an aside, it was an Aladdin's cave of organised chaos, a cacophony of toys. Oh, you can really look Pop. It's like calling him Poppy here with me. She's purring away if you can hear her. Sorry, she's just looking for a bit of attention. I possessed strewn across the bright yellow carpet in a sea of activity. It was an Aladdin's cave of organised chaos, a cacophony of toys that would leave other children gasping. One of my more uptight friends, a small boy called James, actually used to burst into tears on a regular basis whenever he came over to play. He couldn't cope with the idea that nothing had to be put away. The lack of boundaries made him anxious. I, however, adored it. Shitting boy, being 3 years older than me, took immediate charge of playing and began practicing knots by tying me to my bunk bed and throwing bits of Lego at me. Tiring of that, he then decided that he'd like to conduct further grubby experiments. Oh dear. Okay. I don't know. I think this may be a bit of a trigger warning, maybe. I hope not, but we'll go with it. But just trigger warning. There was a small desk in my bedroom, and he pushed me over towards it. Now we're going to play a game, he told me, positioning me so I was facing the desk with my back to him. You're going to bend over the desk, and then I'm going to pull down your pants. Oh, jeez, I thought it was. It was at this point that I felt a chat coming on. Why do you want me to take off my pants? I asked him. Why am I on the desk? I need to check something, he told me. I need to see if I could put a pencil in your bottom. Being 4, I wasn't quite sure what this was all about. Not surprised. I'd seen a pencil being put in one of my dad's pencil sharpeners. Was that it? Oh, God. Are you sharpening the pencil? I asked. Can you sharpen pencils in bottoms? Something like that, he said, putting a hand on the small of my back. I felt myself being pressed forwards onto the desk. There was then a sharp tug at the top of my pants. He was pulling my pants down. I felt silent. I couldn't quite work out what it was that was bothering me. All I knew was that something strange was happening, and I was pretty certain that my mother wouldn't be pleased about it. It's strange, isn't it? We know there's this feeling, this doesn't feel right. It doesn't matter how young you are. And yeah. I'm sorry, Charles. Took a bit of a different turn on this section. Hopefully we'll move on soon. I couldn't quite... all I knew was my mother wouldn't be pleased with it. What happened next is still open to conjecture. Something was shoved up my arsehole. Oh, God, you gotta wait to put things, mind. It might have been a pencil, it might not. We will never know. Are you sharpening the pencil now? I asked, trying to look over my shoulder. You need to be very quiet for a minute, said Shitting Boy. I don't like Shitting Boy anymore. I'm just checking something, he said. Emma, called out my mum. Oh, thank goodness. Footsteps coming up the stairs. Are you up there? What was in my inner so swiftly removed out, and I was pulled up from the desk by the back of my jumper. I stood pulling up my pants, bemused and still baffled, I bet. I can imagine. The door to my room opened, and in walked my mother, 2 glasses of lemonades in her hand. Taking in the scene with one sweeping glance, she looked down at me and then shot a deadly look in the direction of Shitting Boy. What's going on? She growled, stepping towards us. He's been sharpening pencils, I blurted out to fill the silence. Shitting Boy shrugged and leaned against a wall with his arms folded. Brenda, using her patented mother's sixth sense, wafted an arm towards the door. I think you should go home right now, she said, with low menace. We have to get ready for our holiday. If she had known the full truth of what had just been taking place, there is no doubt that my mother's liberal leanings would have been tested to breaking point. Yes, indeed, and rightly so. Do I get to have the lemonade first? Asked Shitting Boy, flicking his hair out of his eyes with a toss of his head. My mother fixed him with a penetrating stare that might have gone on for days. No, she said, and blinking. And off he scuffed. Unable to fully explain what had just happened, I decided the best thing to do was to stand very still. My mother's eyes were darting over me like an X-ray. Is there anything you want to tell me, Emma? She said, leaning over me a little. I shook my head. I may have only been 4, but I wasn't stupid. Unleashing the wrath of my mother was on par with launching a nuclear bomb. Something that my Aunt Phyllis's boyfriend Steve would discover in just under 48 hours. Oh, right. Okay, so I apologise, trigger warning over, hopefully that's that done. Let's move on. Let's see what's going on with Phyllis. I was looking forward to going on holidays with my Aunt Phyllis, not because she always plaited my hair or let me watch her put makeup on, but because I thought she was Cilla Black. Now, I don't know if the Americans know who Cilla Black is. You maybe might want to just YouTube or Google or whatever, but in Britain we very well know who Cilla Black was. My aunt is Cilla Black, I would happily tell playmates, and they would stare at me slightly incredulous. I wasn't lying because I completely believed it. Looking back, the only evidence I had that my aunt was the seminal Liverpudlian entertainer was that they had vaguely similar hair. That was it. She wasn't even from Liverpool. She was from Basingstoke. But the slim and passing resemblance was good enough for me. As far as I was concerned, whenever my aunt was out of sight, she was Cilla Black, and nothing would convince me otherwise. At the time of our holiday, Phyllis was 19 and going out with a young man called Steve, whom she'd met on the Dodgems, the local fun fair, 2 years previously. Steve worked in a laboratory and that made retreads, whatever they were, and was a mod with a pug nose, hazel eyes, and a mop of spiky, short brown hair. I'd met him a couple of times, but I'd also met Phyllis's other secret boyfriend, Paul, who, for reasons of subterfuge and because I had flapping lips, was only ever referred to in my presence as Mr. X. He had shoulder-length hair and looked like the lead singer of the Bay City Rollers. It was the first time I'd encountered a fashionable man. My father had no interest in clothes whatsoever and was unimaginative, jeans and jumper kind of guy. But Mr. X, with his wild untamed hair, yellow flares, and purple platform boots, was a visual sensation. He was a peacock of a man and I adored him. Because I was too young to appreciate the subtle difficulties surrounding having 2 boyfriends at once, I was curious as to whether Mr. X would be joining us. Is Mr. X coming on all day? I asked my mother as she stood stuffing clothes into my suitcase. No, she explained with a smile. Mr. X isn't coming on holiday with us. It's just Phyllis and Steve. Oh, you got a snitchy child who now knows her aunt's having an affair. Oh dear. This, of course, was a bitter disappointment, not least because Steve had such an impenetrable Hampshire accent that might as well have been talking in a foreign language. What did he say? I would ask every time he opened his mouth, and then looking at him with my nose scrunched up as tight as it would go. Now, you're not going to mention Mr. X in front of Steve, are you? Asked my mother, turning to look at me. Remember how we explained about that? Mr. X is a secret. Oh, but what if he comes too? I asked, running my finger along the edge of my mother's dressing table. I can say his name then, can't I? Well, yes, if Mr. X is there, then you can say his name, explained my mother, but he won't be there. He's not coming on holiday with us, and when Mr. X isn't there, we don't say his name. Steve wouldn't be very happy if we talked about Mr. X all the time, so it's best just not to say his name at all. My mother was playing with fire. She sure was. Nothing captured my interest more than something that made no sense. Why does Steve not like Mr. X? I asked, throwing myself down on the carpet and staring up. I like Mr. X. I like Mr. X more than I like Steve. Why doesn't he like him? Why can't I say his name? Gosh, Emma. Brenda, sensing that she was heading down a dead end, picked up a T-shirt and folded it with military determination. Never mind about Mr. X, she muttered. Let's just forget about him. It doesn't matter whether Steve likes him or not. Anyway, we're going on holiday tomorrow now, aren't we? And we're going to see Mam and Gwenny and Roy and Gary and Margaret and Adrian and John and Peggy and little Gary and Paul and Gwyn and Anne and Beverly and Jean and Arthur. So that's nice, isn't it? we'll see them and we can go up the mountain, but because you like that, and then we'll go camping in the tent and we'll see Phyllis and Steve. But not Mr. X, I asked, rolling about a bit. She was trying so hard. Nice try, Brenda. No, said my mother through teeth that were approaching gritted. Not Mr. X, a fact I found intensely interesting. Our new car was a white MG 1100 saloon. It had red plastic seats and went like the clappers, roaring with a proper old-fashioned vroom that people who like driving can only dream about. Tony, determined not to repeat the debacle of our previous trip, had not only had the car serviced, oh well done Tony, but had invested in a proper roof rack, good. And to keep me quiet, my mother had given me a Millie Molly Mandy book to bury my nose in. It was almost as if we knew what we were doing. The plan, travel-wise, was to drive down to Phyllis's house in Basingstoke and then journey on to Wales in a convoy. As we pulled up outside my aunt's house, Steve was putting a suitcase into the boot of the blue Ford Anglia. "Oi, Roy," he said with a wave. "What did he say?" I asked, throwing a look over at my mother. "Never mind," she said. "Now, remember what we said about you-know-who." My dad, because he was a proper man, strolled over to Steve's car with his hands in his pockets. Steve's car had large fat wheels which Dad felt compelled to kick with one side of his shoe. Why do they do that? Yeah, go and buy a car or something and they would kick a wheel. Yeah, I think I'll take that. It's just silly. I've seen it so many times. Just kicked up the side of the wheel. Yeah, I think I'll have that one. Special wheels, are they? Asked Dad, leaning over to a bed to take a better look. Oh gosh, chat. Now, I'm, as you know, Welsh. Got a Welsh accent. That's why I read to you, because you like the Welsh accent. Now, I think I might have to try out other accents in this book because of Steve. So this is because Steve where is he from? Hampshire or something, isn't he? Yeah. So got 'em all fella apart, said Steve with a nod. What? I asked again, looking up again at my mother, who chose to ignore me. "And you got a new steering wheel." Hey, listen, you thought my donkey impression was bad, chat. If I gotta speak Steve's language. Oh dear. Steve continued, oh gosh. "Have a look, beautiful. And a goyous stick and all. Have a look at that. Fella had worked on it." Dad was peering in through the driver's door window. He gestured over to me. "Emma, come and have a look at this," he said, as if I was going to be interested. "Come and see what Steve's done to his steering wheel." I stood on tiptoes and looked in. "Can you see there?" continued my dad, pointing. "He's taken the boss from the centre of the steering wheel and he's replaced it with a watch. Isn't that amazing? A proper watch, and it works. How did you do that, Steve?" Steve joined us in the window frame. I took it, got that watch, stuck it inside, can keep it wound up and all, just wind it there. "Is Mr. X coming?" I asked abruptly, because I just about had enough of this strange babble. So have I ever. My mother, emitting a sudden and involuntary high-pitched whine, swept me up quicker than a whirlwind and carried me promptly into the house as my father, ever the dependable sweeper-upper, shrugged his shoulders and claimed not to have the first idea what I was talking about. 2 minutes later, and my Aunt Phyllis was sitting with her hand over her mouth. "We'll just have to pretend Mr. X is her imaginary friend or something," said my mother, throwing her arms into the air and pacing. I was sitting on the bed, having been perched there so the relevant grown-ups could stare at me and work out what to do. My aunt was in the middle of doing her makeup and was halfway through applying the heavy black eyeliner that gave her that trademark smoky look. One eye was fully made up with false eyelashes applied, while the other was untouched, giving her an odd pirate patch appearance. The horror of my blabbering mouth had rained down on a blanket of terror, and Phyllis was clearly not amused. "Oh God," she whined, "I knew this would happen. Thank God we called him Mr. X. Can you imagine?" "It's not funny, Phyllis," chided my mother. "This is what happens when you play with fire. I can't spend the next week on tenterhooks. That she's going to tell him of everything. It doesn't be thinking about. You won't tell Steve about Mr. X, will you?" said Phyllis, leaning towards me. "In fact, if you promise me that you won't mention Mr. X again, then I'll put your hair in pigtails. Would you like that?" I nodded. "And," continued my aunt, "for every day you don't mention Mr. X, I'll buy you a bag of sweets. Deal?" In short, I was being bribed to keep my mouth shut. As far as I was concerned, travelling in convoy was hilarious. I couldn't get enough of watching my aunt and Steve in the car behind. If I wasn't waving, then I was pulling stupid faces. If I wasn't sticking my tongue out, I was holding up my Millie Molly Mandy book, and anything else I could lay my hands on, Mr. Mouse, a hat, or a packet of crisps. It didn't matter. I was convinced that whatever I could find and hold up would be nothing short of fascinating. My dad, who was an avid tennis fan, had at the same time slipped into a drive-in reverie and was, I probably said all that really wrong, okay? Drive-in reverie, and was saying the name of that year's Wimbledon's ladies champion, Yvonne Goolagong, to himself as if it were a travelling mantra. Yvonne Goolagong, Yvonne Goolagong, and so forth. My mother, whose nerves were already partially frayed by the Mr. X incident and shredded further with every passing minute, was near to breaking point. "Okay," she snapped, crushing her eyes closed. "That's it. Emma, sit down. Tony, I swear to God, if you say Yvonne Goolagong one more time, I'm going to commit a murder." "I can't help it," explained my dad. "I've got Yvonne Goolagong on the brain. Do you think it really is her name, or they just made it up? Do tennis players have stage names like actors?" "Yvonne Goolagong. It's not right, is it?" "Yvonne Goolagong," I shouted with a grin. "Yvonne Goolagong." And then, because this felt like something to share, I stood up again and stared out the back window at my aunt and Steve and yelled, "Yvonne Goolagong," repeatedly while bouncing on the seat, as my mother, exasperated and frazzled, tugged at the back of my tights and told me to sit down. My father was busy negotiating the large roundabout we had found ourselves at. We were turning right to take us onto the A40 that bypassed Oxford. But as we pulled out, a sudden flanks of cars filed around, preventing Steve from following us. As my dad drove off and away, Steve, not realising that we'd taken the right-hand exit, happily carried straight on, speeding blindly into the centre of Oxford. It was quite a while before any of us noticed. Well, you think Emma would have. She was in the back seat looking out the window if you know. In fact, it was me creeping up to sneak. Oh, there we are. In fact, it was me creeping up to sneak out the back window who was the first one to raise the alarm. Where are they? I asked, staring out into the face of a strange man with a moustache. He waved at me. I didn't wave back. My mother twisted herself round and squinted. They're not there, Tony, she said. They're not there, Tony, she said, with something approaching panic in her voice. Where are they, Tony? Where have they gone? There'll be a couple of cars back, said my dad, peering into the rear-view mirror. I'll slow down a bit, let some people overtake. But they weren't a few cars back. They were stuck in a slow-moving one-way system trapped in Oxford town centre and having a blazing row. Oh, nice. With every turn of the wheel, we were being catapulted further away from them. The dreaded reality of what had happened struck my mother. What are we going to do? She whispered, clutching my father by the shoulder. Shall we stop? Can we stop? Can we wait? Can we go back and look for them? Do they know where they're going? Well, they know we're going to Wales, answered my father, shaking his head. But we can't go back. They could be anywhere and we can't stop. There's nowhere to stop. I suppose I could stop when we get to Wales. We could wait for them at the border. But what if they get there first, you know? If he drives really fast. Is this your fault? Asked my mother, sitting forward to give my father a proper glare. Did you do something wrong? No, squealed Tony, his blue eyes flashing. I just went round the roundabout. That's where he must have gone wrong. It's his fault, not mine. If he'd been looking at the signs, he would have turned right. And then, sensing that he was getting himself off a considerable hook, my dad shot my mother a look over his shoulder and added, bloody idiot. Because when in doubt, it's very important to pass the buck of blame to anyone who's not there to defend themselves. What was Steve thinking? Wailed my mother, throwing an arm into the air. Why wasn't he looking properly? My father, who's no fool, threw in a couple of murmurs in agreement. He was probably looking at that watch in his steering wheel, said my dad, as if to underline the moment. Or something. Well, let's look on the bright side. At least he knows we're going to Wales. He'll realise what he's done, turn back and turn the right way up the I-40. That's what he'll do. That's what I would do. I bet Auntie wished Mr. X was on our holiday now, I said, to throw my tuppence worth into the pot, at which my mother looked at me, fixed me with a gaze, and then sunk her forehead into the palm of her hand. This was all going terribly well. There was one small crumb of comfort. Steve knew the name of the campsite. If the worst came to the worst, they could head there under their own steam. Our paths could still collide. But we had Welsh family to deal with first. Phyllis and Steve would have to wait. We would be staying overnight at Mum's, and as we arrived back at the terrace street, we're going to hear from Mum again. I love Mum. Excuse me. And as we arrived back at the terrace street we had passed so fleetingly a year before, a large coal wagon was making deliveries. I remember them. Huge slabs of coal was being dumped on the pavement in front of people's front doors. And the street was a clatter of activity. The delivery men, covered from head to toe in black dust, were banging on doors. Lads of all shapes and sizes were breaking up the table-sized blocks of coals into manageable pieces, and from the top of the street to the bottom, women were standing on their flagstone steps and hollering out orders. Mam was no exception. Being in her 70s, she wasn't expected to break her own coal, to take it through to the cellar. So a young man from the coal wagon was heaving her allotted ton through the house. Don't you get any coal on my sweet? She was yelling after him as he struggled past her with a lump the size of a sink. As fast as the coal was being squirreled away, so the paving stones were being drowned in a soapy water as the women scrubbed away the dust, leaving a filthy grey slurry to cascade down the road. As ever, our arrival was causing as much fuss as the coal. "That Emma, is it?" shouted a woman from the house opposite. She was tall and fat, wrapped in a flowery apron with the sleeves of her jumper rolled up to her elbows. She had squinty eyes and was wearing a bobble hat. Standing next to her with a bucket to collect the smaller pieces of coal was her husband, who in contrast was as thin as a pole and tiny. My dad turned to acknowledge her. "Yes," he shouted back, holding my arm out as if presenting a prized cow. "This is Emma. Say hello to Vangie, Emma." Vangie. "That's it." "Come up from England then?" asked Vangie, leaning against a door frame. "Never you mind where they've come from, Vangie Bull," shouted my grandmother. "Always got your nose in everyone's business." "All right, Brenda," persisted Vangie. "Not wearing black today, then?" This is so funny because this is what people were like. My mother, preoccupied with thoughts of her sister, mustered up a weak smile and shook her head. It wasn't the quiet arrival she'd been hoping for. My grandmother, incensed at her neighbour's nosiness, pushed us rather forcefully in through the front door. "Vangie Bull, come push, come pull." She warned, waving a thumb over her shoulder. "That woman would know if someone was pregnant if they were still a virgin. She's unbelievable. Where's your sister Brent?" "We don't know, ma'am," explained Dad. "We lost them at Oxford, and they don't know where we live. We'll have to keep our fingers crossed so they make their way to the campsite." "You're mad going camping again," muttered Mum, grabbing a loaf of bread and shoving it under her armpit. "Bloody mad. Now then, bit of bread and butter." Nice. My grandmother's house was very basic, with 7 children to raise. A survey of money had never been in the offing, and with nothing but a small pension to live on. Mum was still getting by with an outside toilet and no bathroom. Oh, we all had outside toilets. I remember going, when I was doing my care work and I was going around people's houses, and they still, and this is not long ago, still had outside toilets and still had coal sheds as well, which was, it's just mad. Times changed. Okay, the toilet, which grumbled at the bottom of the long, thin garden like a tethered bear, may as well have come with his own screaming woman. It was so terrifying. To look at it, it was reminiscent of the tiny confined hell holes you find in horror films. And I had the sense that my mother, as we walked towards it, needed me just as much as I needed her. The toilet frame was wooden, and the door, clinging to 3 blackened hinges, was partially rotted away at the bottom and down on one side panel, giving it a battered, beaten down appearance. Yep. As my mother creaked the door open, a smell of oil dripped through the air, wafting from the old brass lamp hanging next to the cistern to stop the water freezing during winter. The toilet was unlike anything I'd ever seen. There was no bowl to speak of. Instead, there was an old seat and riser. A rectangular box of heavy oak with a hole cut into its middle. A roll of toilet paper sat to the right of the hole. To the left was a pile of newspapers and magazines, reading material for the long contemplative silences that went hand in hand with having a trip to the lab. As I stared at the hole, I was reminded not only of my mother's terrible warning about the cataclysmic consequences of wooden toilet seats, but also my mishap with that bucket 12 months previously. There was no way I was sitting down on it. Imagine if I fell down that, I wouldn't be found for days. So instead, as my mother stood outside with the door slightly ajar to let more light in, I decided the best thing to do was to stand on the right and aim for the hole and hope for a miracle. As I stood, feet placed on either side of the hole, I pulled my tights and pants as best I could down. Sadly, my best was not quite good enough, and as I started peeing, I found my pants and tights were rapidly becoming warm and very wet. Oh no, she's always covered in wee lover. And away, they're just standing upright. And weeing was a disaster. I shifted slightly to adjust my aim. Even though I was now missing my pants, I was instead hitting the back of the riser, sending a plume of pea spray splattering everywhere. I hosed the place with piss. It was everywhere. All over the newspapers, all over the toilet paper, and most of it in my left shoe. I was again in Wales and again covered in urine. Oh, Emma, no, my mother whined as she surveyed the devastated scene. What were you doing? I was still standing on the riser, but with a look of wretched despair. I needed a bath, but my grandmother didn't have a bath. What she'd had instead was a large tin tub, dragged up from the cellar, placed in front of the black iron fireplace, and filled with bucket after bucket of warm water. Yeah, the tin bath in front of the fireplace. That brings memories back. Not for me so much. I don't think I was in a tin bath. I know I was bathed in the sink. I know I had a bath, but I know at times I was bathed in the sink. As babies, little swill down in the sink. But I know my mum and her, my mum and her mum, my grandmother, my nan who's passed on now, tin baths were, yeah. So timing is right, really. Tin bath in front of the fire. Basic it may have been, but as I sat, covered in suds in my grandmother's front room, I found the experience exhilarating. To this day, it is the best bath I've ever had. Oh. Having said that, there was one aspect of my bath that wasn't very enjoyable, and that was the constant stream of visitors into Mum's front room. Introvert, no one shut their front door. Neither did anyone knock on the door as they came in. Banging on a front door was a sign that someone had died. Oh, God. And so, as news spread that the bride in black was in residence, the steady trickle of neighbours began. Bopa Jackson was first into the sitting room. Bopa? In her 70s, hair tied tight back in a bun, she was a small, slight woman, but with a voice that belied her size. "Hello, Tony," she boomed as she wandered in, like a fly might flitting through an open window. "How are you keeping, all right?" "I'm fine. Had a bad knee, but other than that..." "That Emma? You enjoying your bath?" "Hello, Brenda. What's that you're wearing? Smock, is it? That's what they wear in London, is it? Very nice." There's no time for answers. It's just acknowledging everyone with a question. I love it. Bopa was a particular favourite of my father's. As a child, he would run errands for her at threepence a go. Not only that, but every Sunday Tony would scamper across to Bopa's house, where she always kept the last fat spoonful of rice pudding waiting for him. As kind as she was also renowned for her temper. Woe betide the child who made the paving stones in front of her house dirty. When dinky cars came to the valley, the children would spend hours marking out roadways on the pavement with chalk. But if you did it in front of Papa Jackson's doorway, you not only had your roadway scrubbed away with a stiff brush, but you also had your lump of chalk thrown in with the washing water, where you could only watch it melt away to nothing. Fast on Papa's heels was Katie, a short, stout barrel of a woman who lived next door. She would bang on the wall of the kitchen to signal her imminent arrival and then appear, still wiping her hands on the bottom of her apron to see if a pot was brewing or if there was any news from the street. Gossip, basically. "In the bath, are we?" noted Katie, nodding in my direction. I stayed and nodded. In normal circumstances, I would have entered into an extended and overly complicated explanation of the chain of events which had led me to be sitting in a tin tub in broad daylight, but the fact of the matter was I was a bit embarrassed. "Messed herself in the lav," explained my grandmother, looking down at me. "Thought you had to stand up on it. Never heard of such a thing." "Stand up on it?" wailed Katie, letting out a hoot. "No, we don't stand up on toilets in Wales." "Is that what you do in England?" "Mummy said you can't sit on wooden toilet seats." I began pointing in my mother's direction. "Oh, bad things happen." Everyone turned and looked at her. Brenda, sensing an unwanted awkwardness, threw in a sudden and perfectly formed laugh. She spluttered, throwing a solid shake of the head for good measure. "I didn't say that. What I said was that you had to be careful about splinters." "Generally, not just from toilet seats, from wood. Anything made from wood." "No, you didn't," I said. "I was once in the lav," chipped in Bopa, saving the day. "And a rat ran out between my legs, bold as brass. Up it came from the sewer. Screamed the place down, I did." Oh, I'd scream too. "Vangie Bull's getting an indoor toilet," added Katie, setting herself into the sofa. "That's what she says anyway. Her husband's aunt died. Turns out she had all this money and they're getting some of it. But I heard you can apply for a grant and get indoor toilets, bathrooms, all sorts. A woman from up Blancombe told me. She knows someone from Blaenrondda who's been given a proper bathroom suite. They got a bidet. All it does is wash your bum. That's all it does. Proper posh, like." Proper posh, like. I can think. "What's wrong with a flannel?" Spoke her hands on her knees. "Bidets, loads of nonsense." "Anyway," said Katie, giving my mother a nudge, "I come round to ask if Emma would like to light the lamps with Danny this evening. He's my husband, does the gas lights in the street. I'll tell him to pop in when he's doing Scott Street, shall I? I bet she's never seen the lamps being lit. All electric where you are, innit?" "Oh, that would be brilliant," smiled my mother, relieved she'd got past this social hiccup. "She'd love that, wouldn't you?" I didn't reply. I was still staring, having learnt a valuable lesson. My mother was a liar. My dad was the youngest boy in a family of 7. He had 3 brothers, Gwyn, Gary and John, and 3 sisters, Marian, Gwenny and Jean. The eldest sister, Marian, had emigrated to America after receiving a ticket in the post from her GI boyfriend, Gus, whom she had met at the end of the war while working in an armaments factory in Salisbury. They had written to each other every week for 12 years before Gus had enough money to send for her. Oh, every Christmas they would be sent a large parcel from America, which my dad would look forward to with wide-eyed excitement. It would be packed with all manner of mind-boggling treats, tinned foods, chocolates, comics, and on one occasion a startling blue silky tie that had a woman in it, in nothing more than a bikini emblazoned down its centre. They were a close and loving family, even if they had all gone their separate ways, and there was a genuine delight at the seeing their youngest brother home and back in the fold. Within hours of our arrival, they had filed in one by one, until the whole family, bar Marian, who couldn't be there, was crammed into Mam's front room. Being an only child and living in Stevenage, where we were 2 hours from the nearest relative, I was filled with a glowing warmth from being surrounded by family. I was enraptured by my Welsh aunts and uncles and thought them fabulous. The loudest and most entertaining was my dad's brother Gwyn. He was a member of the Celtic Operatic Society and would burst into song mid-sentence, filling the room with syrupy baritone sounds that made my chest rumble. He was funny too, and I sat and cuddled into my Aunt Gwenny, who had the kindest face you could ever be blessed with. He had the family howling with laughter. Remember David? Number 34. That's crack me anyway. Referring to people by the numbers of their houses. Remember David? Number 34, Gwyn began, nudging my dad on the knee. Skinny thing, all bones. Couldn't beat a gnat. Well, he got married, see, and he finds out his wife's having an affair. So he goes to have it out with the fella, but he can't fight him. A gust of wind would have him over. So he waits and waits until the fella, who's a plumber, goes down into the side culvert at the bottom of Scott Street. You know, it's like a big well. Got to use a ladder to get in and out of it, explained my Uncle John with a twinkle. So, the fella's gone down in the culvert, continued Gwyn, and up comes David. Stands over him, says, You've been sleeping with my wife. Whips out his cock and picks us all over him. Oh God. I'm sorry. I wasn't expecting. Whips out his cock and pisses all over him. Oh gosh. And we're not talking about half-cocked guns here either. Terrible, shouted Jean, who was handing round some sticky slices of Titian lap. Pistol over him, shouted Gwen, thumping his thigh and laughing. Still he had it coming. Tapping someone else's wife. Not right at all. No, they all mumbled in agreement. So you're going camping tomorrow, are you? Asked Gary, who brought some of his homemade wine for everyone to drink. I hope we don't have a repeat of last year. Mam not going with you then? No fear, muttered Mam, folding her arms. Never again. No, my Nanny Tessie, she used to say no fear. No fear, muttered Mam. Never again. We're going up the Gower to Port Ainan after, nodded my dad. Brenda's sister's supposed to be with us, but we've lost her. Roy and I went camping a couple of weeks ago, said Gwenny in a soft lilt. Dropped down to Spain, but it was too hot. Brenda, we just lay in the tent all day, couldn't go out, exhausting it was. No chance of it being too hot in Port Ainan, chipped in Gwyn. I hope you've packed your jumpers. Hey, have you seen John's motorbike? But in, Gary. He's got a sidecar. Let him have a go in it. She'll love it." An outbreak of enthusiastic agreement exploded in the room, and I was bustled out to the front of the house, where my Uncle John's Vincent 1000cc motorbike was parked. I'd never seen a sidecar before, and I was placed inside. It felt like being put into the cockpit of a Spitfire. Goggles were pulled down over my eyes, and Gwenny tightened the strap at the back of my head so that they wouldn't fall down. My Uncle John was the good-looking one in the family. He had a head of tight back curls and cheeky smile that made all the possibilities endless. Being the closest in age to my dad, John was the brother with whom Tony had got up to most of his adolescent hijinks. They had broken windows together, chased girls together, and had once even almost drowned together in an ill-thought-out dash into an angry sea hell-bent on carrying them to a watery grave. As with all proper handshakes with death, the brothers near miss had not only forged a special bond between them, but had also left them with a determination to embrace life. I looked up at my uncle, goggles on and grinning. There was an infectious sense of fun. We were going for a ride on his motorbike, and it was going to be brilliant. As John thumped his foot down on the starter pedal, the thick rasp of the engine kicked in, shaking my body with fat vibrations. Everyone was standing on the pavement, laughing and waving. Everyone, that is, except my mother, who just stood looking pale and tortured, in that way mothers do when they know that sometimes they have to stand back and let their children have an experience. We thundered through to Herbert, screaming up and down the roads and bouncing round corners, although we couldn't have been going more than 30 miles an hour, being so near the floor and exposed to the elements. It felt a lot faster. As first rubs with the speed go, it was electrifying, and I found myself gripping the walls of the sidecar with white-knuckled intensity. We weaved our way through the terraced streets and reached the uphill climb to the top of the mountain. Houses gave way to sheds that in turn gave way to desolate lumps of rock lingering among the ferns. Sheep and ponies stopped what they were doing to stare at us while we hurtled past, and with every twist of the road I felt a jolt of fear that I could fly off the edge of the mountain at any moment. Wind battering through my hair, and even though it was a sunny day, the sting of the cold Welsh wind was at my cheeks. I was vaguely aware of my uncle shouting things as we passed a trout farm or an abandoned car, but I couldn't hear him, so fierce was the roar from the exhaust. At the head of the pass, my uncle slowed a little so I could take in the glory of the view. We had reached the big stone, an enormous obelisk of rock that seemed propped out of nowhere. Below us flew away the magnificent river valley of the Rhondda. Towns and villages climbing up as far as the mountainsides as they did, and in front of us 2 incredible peaks. Ahead of us, the Graig y Deliw mountain, and to the right, the Penpich, a striking flat-topped summit. Neither mountain had any trees, and in 1971, before the Forestry Commission planted the area with pines, they were still open spaces where anyone could wander as they pleased. Off in the distance, I could see a group of boys cascading down the mountainside, sticks in hands, ferns in pockets. But it wasn't just the natural beauty of my father's homeland that caught my attention. As we drove on, I could just make out the pit head, a giant wheel rising up from the horizon. The mountain was being disemboweled before my very eyes. In the midst of the green ramble, the dark mechanics of the pit stuck out like a black menace. Low, moody buildings surrounded the pit tower, coal trucks waiting on gloomy rail tracks, and men and pit ponies stood blackened with dust, almost shocked that such a dirty industry could have found itself in such an idyllic location. Wales was a constant contrast of beauty and hardship, and as we made our quicksilver descent back into the valley, my delight at the speed, the sights and the smells were tempered with a sense of the brutal. There was a raw honesty to the mountain that one commanded respect. This was the land of my father. Ah, I love that song. My heritage. And we clattered back up Scott Street, where my family was all standing in the street waiting for me. I felt a terrible sadness that these riches weren't mine on a daily basis. "Do you think Phyllis is all right?" asked my mother later as we sat eating Gwenny's homemade pickled onions. They were so juicy and sweet that I couldn't keep my hand out of the jar. "Look," began my dad, holding out one hand. "If Steve has got any sense, he'll have made his way to the campsite. They'll be there now. They'll have got their tent up. They'll be fine. A man who could put a watch in the middle of his steering wheel can find a campsite. Trust me." My mother chewed her lip a little and nodded. "And I suppose there's nothing we can do about it tonight," added Brenda. "And you're right, they'll be at the campsite. They will. Emma, don't eat all those pickled onions. They'll give you a terrible wind." The pickled onions I'd eaten before had always become with the acrid sharp twist, but these were so delicate and bursting with flavour they were like sweets. Sorry, Chad. A bit of a pause there. I had to go and sort out my cat and my dog and get some drink for my throat. But let's get back to where I was. Sorry. Here we go. Sorry if that just blew your eardrums. Okay, so the pickled onions I had eaten before had always come with that acrid sharp twist, but these were so delicate and bursting with flavour. They were like sweets. I bet they were sweet pickled onions. I like them at Christmas time. The jar, which I had my fist in for the past 15 minutes. Oh, no. No, you don't stick your hand in the jar, Emma. Was taken away and top screwed back on, but I felt such a terrible longing. I just sat and stared at them, bobbing away and uneaten. "Don't stare at the onions," whispered my mother, giving me a pat on the knee, a phrase I don't think has ever been said to me since. No, I don't stare at the onions. Thankfully, a visitor was on hand to distract me. It was Danny, who lived next door, the husband of Katie, who had been round earlier to ask if I'd like to accompany him as he lit the gas lamps in Scott Street. Of course, this is in the 70s and they still didn't have lights there. Danny was a tall, thin man, very fit, and with a face that glowed with the health of a man who was out in all weather. He was wearing heavy brown boots and a battered leather jerkin and had all manner of half-stuffed pockets. With the natural, wiry energy of a man who had a job to do, he stood in the doorway of Mum's sitting room and spoke very fast, words shooting out of him like bullets. "How do?" "How do?" I haven't made that for ages. "How do?" That's basically, "How are you doing?" "How do?" He began fidgeting on his feet. "Come to see if anyone wants to come up the street to see the lamps lit. Got to get on mind. Still got to Newydd, Blancombe, Blind Rhondda to get to. Got a mantle need fixing at the bottom end. You can watch me do that and all. Hello, Tony, Brenda, glad to see you. Well, you come then?" Danny, who had to light all the gas lamps in 4 villages, would walk miles every day. He only needed 2 things: an 8-foot ladder that he carried over one shoulder and a long wooden pole with a hook at the end that operated a small lever at the top of the lamps. "Now the lamp," he exclaimed, as we stood beneath the first of Scott Street's 2 lamps, "is operated by a small switch, When we switch it on, the gas comes out, and then we have a light. So shall we have a go at turning it on? I nodded. Putting a hand on my shoulder, he manoeuvred me in front of him so that I was facing the lamp. So, let's see if you can get the hook on the lever, he said, as I stood between his legs staring up. He had one hand on the pole steadying it, while I had both hands on the bottom gripping it tight. I didn't know what I was trying to latch onto, but Danny's guiding hand flicked the hook on to the top of the switch. Now pull it down, he instructed. I gave the pole a tug. A small fizz sounded from above, and as if by magic, the gas mantle, a small white ball made of mesh net, filled with a wondrous glow. Suddenly there was light. It was like being asked to turn on the Christmas lights on Regent Street. As we waved off Danny, who was already scampering up the street to bring light to the rest of the valley, my dad noticed that the cockle cart, cockles and mussels, anyone? The cockle cart, which came round once a week, had appeared at the bottom end of the street behind us. It was being pushed by a woman whose voice was being carried up towards us. "Cockles!" she shouted. "Cockles!" The cockle cart was a metallic, lead-coloured box on a trolley that had 4 pram-like wheels. The cockle woman, or cocklewoman, as everyone called her, cocklewoman, I'm pronouncing it cocklewoman, as in cocklewoman, as everyone called her, was a tiny, ancient, shriveled-up thing who couldn't have been taller than 4'5". She was bent over like a broken shoe. Gosh. And to me, seemed incredibly scruffy, in a long, dirty, warm, waterproof and brown flat cap with a fat brim. Her hands were red and gnarled, and looked rough to the touch. She had a pint glass in one hand, and as the women of the streets came up with their pans and buckets, she lifted the 2 lids of the trolley to reveal hundreds, if not thousands, of cockles in their shells. Thrusting the pint glass in, she would fill whatever receptacle was presented to her, all while shouting, "Cockles, 5 pence a pint." My dad lifted me up so I could look into the trolley at the cockles. "What you do," he explained, "is you take the cockles home and then you put them in a bucket with some fresh water, and then you leave them like that for a day, and that gets rid of all the salt water that's in them. And they sit in the bucket, bubbling away. Sometimes they open up and you can see the cockle cleaning itself, just bubbling away. And then when all the salt water is gone, you throw them all into a big hot pan and they open up and cook. Fresh cockles. Delicious." "Is that you, Tony?" said a voice from behind us. I turned around but was puzzled to see that no one was there. "Tony," the voice called out. "Down here." Following the sound of the voice, I looked down. There was a woman staring up at me from a tiny barred window that seemed to sink below street level. I tugged on my dad's arm. This was startling. There was a woman shouting at us, and she appeared to live underneath the pavement. "Auntie Lal," shouted my dad with a wave, as if there was nothing out of the ordinary. "Get me some cockles, would you?" yelled back Lal, who had now opened the window and was holding out a 10-pence pint. 10-pence piece. God, I can't speak. Was holding out a 10-pence piece between the bars. "Just 2 pints, mind." I was rooted to the spot. What a day I'd had. I'd covered myself in urine. I'd had a wash in a tin bath. I'd had my first go in a sidecar. I'd lit a street lamp, and now my father was conversing with a woman who lived in a hole underground. Why is she down there? I asked, turning and looking up at my father. Oh, she lives in the cellar, answered my dad, as if that was the most normal thing in the world. That's Auntie Lal. She loves Shakespeare. 2 pints, please. The cockle woman pulled out a bag and filled it with cockle shells, all clattering against each other like pebbles being dragged along the shoreline. Let's give them to Auntie Lal, said my dad, handing me the bag. Lal's face was still at the window. She had piercing blue eyes that blazed out of a round, well-filled face, and her hair was tied up into a lazy knot. Oh, thank you, Tony, she shouted up as we passed the bag down to her. It's your Emma, is it? Doesn't she look like Beck? My goodness, same eyes. You getting some cockles? Not today, no, said my dad, shaking his head. We won't have time to clean them before we leave tomorrow. We're off camping tomorrow. Camping, is it? Said Lal, raising her eyebrows. Didn't you go camping last year and it all ended very bad, didn't it? It did a bit, said my dad with a nod. That won't happen this year, mind. Nothing will go wrong this year. Oh, don't speak too soon, tatted Lal, eyebrows knitting together. Never tempt fate, Tony. Look what happened to Hamlet. But it was too late. We had tempted fate, and fate was very tempted indeed. There you go, chat. That's the end of part 4 of the book. I hope you enjoyed it. I know it was a lot longer, but I hope you still enjoyed it. And yeah, it was nice because hearing people must think, oh my gosh, you got people living in blooming pavements and cockles and the coal man, but you know, this is Wales. This is our heritage, and I think that this book is capturing the spirit of the people of Wales. You know, the families coming in the house, you know. You kind of, when I was younger, it wasn't a case where we left our doors open. You could, but it was a case of like anyone would just knock the door and go, come in, and shout my mum's name. And it was just a quick knock, open the door. It's like, knock, knock. Call the name, they're already in. Come for a cup of tea, you know, and a chin wag, and the kids out in the street, like I said to you before, and they're standing on the gate, just, you know, watching everybody. And, you know, it brings back a lot of joyful memories of simple life. And I mean, I don't think you could get much simple than lighting the lamps in the Rhondda. But it brings back that, no, you can't pick up the phone and just do something. You can't, there's no computer mentioned, you know. I'm sure it'll come in towards this book. I'm sure there'll be things that, you know, I mean, Tony's cars are getting better, that's for sure. You know, but you know, whereas if someone was following us to go on a journey now and they went round the roundabout the wrong way or something, we'd just give them a call or something and just say, you know, where you to? So I'm at this place, right? Will you go on the wrong way? Come this way. They couldn't do that back then. So if you weren't looking, if you weren't following, you were buggered. So yeah, it is so many things that the tin bath. Like I told you about my families, they all bathed in tin baths, all did. And that's just the way it was. And I don't think that is particularly special to Wales. I think that was the time. But yeah, I like how Emma comes from a different area, and then she's brought back into her father's part of the family, where she's able to receive this you know, kind of experience that she treasures. I like that. I like that very much. Sorry about the not so nice stuff at the beginning of the book. I'm sorry if that affected anybody. I hope not. And if it did, then I hope that there's nothing else, and I will check. But I put trigger warning on the on the channel as well, just so people are aware. But know that I'm grateful. Yesterday you'd all tuned in for my premiere and watched me chatting away to the content creators that I like to watch, and what's going on with them and why I like them. And I appreciate so much all your lovely comments. You were so kind to me. Unbelievably kind people, and I thank you, because it really does make me smile. It really does make me feel good that I can make you smile, make you laugh, or even bring back some memories of when you were younger and how things were. Or even if it's just, listen to the wonky donkey when you're having a bad day and laughing your head off at how ridiculous I sound and my donkey impressions, then that's all good too. It's all a bit of fun for us here at Welsh Ladies Place. It's all a bit of fun. And I'm going to leave you to it now. And thank you so much for the new subscribers. I know that Big and Two sent some subscribers over to me. Thank you so much, Big N. I love Big N very, very much. I appreciate it. And I know that I let a few people know today that I had mentioned them. So, and I know that a couple of people have subscribed from that. Once I just get it confirmed, I'll let you all know. But it's just thank you. Please, just on your way out, just give it a like, and hopefully you'll come back again. We'll do something shorter next time. I said I've got to get a Sarah Bowen letter, and so once I get her letter, I'm gonna try and do that. I got a list of requests from everybody from before. So, but if there are more requests, please add them in the comments. I'll write them in the list. We'll get round to it eventually, man. We ain't got, it's no race. It's just a bit of a laugh, right? We're just all here together, aren't we? All right, my lovelies. You have a lovely day. The rest of your Sunday, enjoy it. And I'm sure I'll see you in chat in other content creators chats tomorrow. Ta-ra, my lovelies. Ta-ra.